Hello and welcome to another episode of the CG Garage. This is episode number 422 featuring Sean Looper, the CTO of Crafty Apes. It was absolutely wonderful catching up with Sean. I've actually known him for a long time. Believe it or not, he interviewed for a job as a head of technology over at Sway many moons ago. He didn't end up taking that job, but we still remained friends, which was kind of awesome and wonderful. Very bright guy, very charismatic person, has an incredible background, which of course you get to hear all about on this podcast, including how he moved to Beverly Hills of all places for his first job in LA. Really cool. We also talk about, his first nerd crush being Bill Spitzak, which is really funny. Some old stories of us in a car cruising around downtown Los Angeles with Paul Debevec after SIGGRAPH, which was also hilarious. And a lot of these, obviously, talk a lot about his role over at Crafty Apes, where he has been developed. He's started recently as the CTO, and he's building up some interesting ideas of where technology is going to go from now on. And he's got a really great knowledge, especially in his stuff on the cloud, as well as some of his ambitions in AI. So really exciting to talk about to Sean about that stuff, and can't wait to see what he ends up building in the future. All right, we have a few announcements right now. You guys know already, I've mentioned this several times, that V-Ray 6.1 update 1 for 3ds Max is out and is coming for all the other products very soon. So before you start asking about that, we do have a special happening right now. So if you want to save on the new V-Ray and Phoenix annual commercial licenses, just use the code April20 for 20% off at checkout. So again, that's April 20, all caps for the April. I don't know if that's important, but might as well say it, for a 20% discount. And that is valid through April 25th. So make sure and do that. It's coming up real soon. And a couple of events I want to let you know about. These are all available at chaos.com/events. We are currently right now at NAB. So go check us out at NAB. We are at the AMD booth. We got several things going on there. A few demos. It'd be cool to see you there. So if you're at NAB in Las Vegas, go ahead and stop by our booth. We are also going to be at FMX, but on April 24th through 26th, and that's, of course, is in Stuttgart, Germany, as it is every year. So if you're at FMX, we'd love to see you there. Okay, if you want to know more about the podcast, you can go to facebook.com/CG Garage. You can always go to our website directly. That is chaos.com/CG Garage. If you like to watch these videos, which is a lot of fun, they become very popular. We upload them on our channel. And that's youtube.com/Chaos Group TV. So make sure and check us out there and subscribe to us there. If you have ideas, questions, or comments on the podcast, we'd love to hear from you. Our email is labs@chaos.com. But for now, please enjoy episode number 422 with Sean Looper from Crafty Apes.
Welcome to another CG Garage, where the Chaos Group talks. You'll know it's over when the last bucket drops. We're gonna fire off rays in high dynamic range. We know that ambient occlusion is passé. Global illumination won't lead you astray. And while image-based lighting is really swell, you need to make sure everything has Fresnel.
Sean, it's awesome to see you. I think maybe the first time we actually met was you were interviewing at Sway. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that would have been. Oh my gosh, it's funny because I remember dates by shows, so that would have been right before Green Lantern, I believe. No, that was even before that. Yeah, this was probably going back to 2010, 2009.
Yes, that's about right.
Yeah.
No. It was earlier than that because it would have been 2008.
Oh, right. Because I went to Riot instead of Sway. That's what happened. Oh my gosh. Yeah, yeah, my friend. It's been a while. It's
been funny.
And then I
go ahead.
I still tell the story of that fateful SIGGRAPH where it was you, me, and Debevec, like cruising around SIGGRAPH and like cruising to parties and watching Paul with his mad like dating game because he was single at that point in time and he was really eager to like meet people. Right. And I was just enamored because I think between Paul and Larry Gritz, they were like my two nerd crushes from, back in the 90s. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm hanging out with Paul Debevec. This is amazing. Anyway.
I remember we met up at some party and we were
It was the massive party.
It was a what party?
It was the massive
That's
party.
what it was. It was a massive party. And Paul was like,
Yep.
hey, let's go to the next party. And I was like, all right,
Yeah, he was
who's
ready to
driving?
go.
Were
The
you
guy
driving, I think. It was like,
No, it was either you or him.
Right.
It was some nice, some Beamer, I don't know, or some really nice car. And I was like, man, this is where I want to be. These guys are on top of the world right now. This is great.
it's funny. It reminded me of this hilarious story I heard from a friend of mine who I work with. He was at NVIDIA. He's retired now, but he used to work with, what's his name? Head of Apple, Steve Jobs. Right.
Oh, yeah.
So he was in the car with Steve Jobs and they were going to a meeting, and Steve apparently just had a breakup and he was very depressed in the car. Yeah. And this guy said, it's like, don't worry, Steve. I mean, you're Steve Jobs. I mean, I'm sure you'll find someone else. And he looked at him and says, are you sure, John? You think so, John?
Yeah.
So it's kind of,
it's funny. It's like, we're all human, I mean, obviously
Mm-hmm.
that's cliche, but, it's funny how, thinking about my heroes and nerd crushes in the industry, that I've subsequently met, and worked with, it's been pretty awesome to go from seeing them from the outside when I was young and, just looking at the industry with wide-eyed and in awe, and then getting through to the point where, I'm on a first name basis with them and, or have led their, I've been their boss or their manager or their supervisor, you know what I mean? Like
Yep.
it's, but also getting to know them, at a personal level, know their pets, know their families, like be friends. And it's really, I don't know, it's a cool thing. I guess it's, one of the takeaways of getting older and established in a career is you kind of get to transition from that, infatuation phase to like a more mature, deeper relationship with people over time. It's good. It's really good.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with that. One of my biggest nerd crushes who I haven't met yet is John Carmack. Like that.
Yes. I don't think I've met John yet either. It's funny. So I mentioned
Paul and Larry.
And Larry, of course. If he's watching, Larry's probably shaking his head and blushing. No, but like definitely in my top 3 right up there is Bill Spitzak.
Oh, Bill? Really?
Yeah.
He's so funny.
It is funny because Bill and I met. I like to say that Bill's met me many times for the first time. Like Bill, I clearly never made a lasting impression on Bill in the first 10 years that I knew Bill, because I would repeatedly meet Bill and I'm like, hey Bill, and he'd say, oh hi, I'm Bill, and I'm like, oh okay, well I'm Sean, hi, good to meet you. But I remember I remember when D2 software was launched at a digital domain and they released the first version of Nuke, and the small shop I was working for, we were one of the first customers, and I remember, I'm trying to write.
Which shop was that? Was it Digital Dimension?
Oh no, it was before Digital Dimension. This was like some little advertising auto stereo company in Beverly Hills, of all places, and it was my very first job moving to Los Angeles, and they were doing all this After Effects work for converting 8 camera renders and live camera streams, like captured principal photography into auto stereo, glasses free, similar to lenticular technology. And so I came in and I'm like, look, you guys, we've got 8 video streams, we've got RGBA, that's 32 channels. Nuke perfectly fits that because the first versions of Nuke only supported 32 color channels. Mm-hmm. And so I pushed them. I'm like, let's do it. This would be amazing. And again, young and bright eyed about any new exciting tech. And so we got it, and I was trying to write all these plugins to work with all these auto stereo content, and I had this, I ended up executing on, but at the time I had this plan to basically build a flame bay for auto dialing in 3-dimensional stereo comps or auto stereo comps with 8 streams and all of that stuff in our proprietary TVs. And in order to get access to the NDK, to the API, you had to sign an NDA because it was like so new and, full of proprietary tech. And so, I was excited. It was like my first NDA that I ever got to sign. I'm like, oh man, I've made it. I've made it in Hollywood. This is amazing. And and I remember I'm like teaching myself C++ at the time, and I'm writing just some basic color correction plugins, and I got stuck. And so I'm like, okay, I'll call support. So I call support, and I don't remember who it was I first talked to, but within like 30 seconds, they're like, oh, okay, hold on 1 second. And they put Bill Spitzak on the phone. And I had met Bill twice before, for the first time, of course, each time. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, like he was already on my nerd crush list, Right. I'm like, I'm talking to Bill Spitzak right now about Nuke, and I was totally geeking out. Anyway, so fast forward however many years, and I probably had, like I said, met Bill for the first time 3 or 4 more times after that. I'm at DreamWorks Animation, and I had spent a couple years working on a whole pipeline studio in a box initiative that they had as part of their Oriental DreamWorks kind of how can we spin up a studio anywhere in the world effort that they were real big on at the time. And that right around the time that NBC Universal bought DreamWorks. And so after about 2 years, they disbanded that unit. NBC Universal didn't seem to have any interest in Oriental DreamWorks, and so they just disconnected that whole relationship, divested, etc. And I had the great opportunity to move into DreamWorks Animation R&D like proper, which was awesome. Like I got dropped right into what at the time was their Torch team, and they had inherited a number of people or hired a number of people from who were formerly at Rhythm and Hughes, who'd worked on Crom, which was, as best as I understood, was Bill Spitzak's baby. And so Bill had gotten hired to work on Torch, and so I kind of got airdropped into this team, and within, I don't know, 3 months, there was this just massive shift away from Torch and all the proprietary lighting tools into Katana. And I had been on the Katana team at ImageWorks for about 3 years, mostly working on Nuke at the beginning, but this was around the time that Foundry and ImageWorks had developed their relationship, and so we were working on the commercial. Collectively we were working on the first commercial version of Katana, and so I had all this Katana knowledge, and they said, well, we want to pivot towards that, and so within 3 months they had made me the tech lead of the whole team.
Okay,
and that that included Bill Spitzak, and
right.
And it was just amazing because I remember Bill's Bill's amazing, but he's quirky, and so you have to work with Bill in a certain way, and so I remember just feeling like in awe of the fact that I got to work with Bill, but at the same time recognizing that Bill was going to do whatever Bill was going to do. And so it was a really great, I actually use it as an example, like a leadership example, when they ask you in interviews, like, tell me about a time where you had somebody who you had to treat differently than everyone else or whatever. But it really forced me to think, because I was coming into the situation with just so much respect for Bill, that all I wanted to do was see him be successful. And so it really forced me to think creatively about how to take someone that's that brilliant, that accomplished, and wants to and should be setting their own direction, and still line them up with what we actually needed to accomplish as a team. And it was a really great learning experience for me. And then of course, I geeked out for the entire time I worked there. Just being able to say, I work with Bill, and I always give.
Did you work with TechStep as well?
Oh yes. So Jonathan and I worked together. So he was he was heading up most of the Nuke development. But we both were, DreamWorks had this steering committee for USD adoption, and so we were in the process of adopting USD, and it was primarily being driven from a requirements perspective by production, but the engineering chops that were necessary and it were for USD both now and at the time were relatively high. So we were involved from R&D to, I think, provide that kind of more sage wisdom from an R&D perspective. And then, of course, Jonathan and I, by that point in time, certainly for me, were long in the tooth and senior in the industry. So all that to say, he and I worked pretty closely on that, and we became good friends. And so between him and Bill, it was pretty awesome just to work in that environment. But I used to give Bill a hard time because both he and Jonathan, I think, won their second Academy Award for Nuke while we were all working together. And so I would always introduce Bill as 2-time Academy Award winning Bill Spitzak, which of course would embarrass him immensely. And it just kind of became a running thing. But anyway,
that's awesome, man. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love the fact that it was driven. I think that Paul was actually my first sort of like nerd crush that I met in person. I actually met him at DD during the Martini nights when they had him way back in the day.
Yes.
And, he was one of the people that sort of really inspired me in terms of lighting, right? Because I saw the stuff he did first on the Campanile project and then on Fiat Lux. I think Fiat Lux is the one that was like, whatever the hell this man's doing, it's magic, and I want to do that, right?
Totally.
And
it really felt that period of time. I mean, the HDR shop early days, and the early days of HDR in general, and seeing the advent of just light probes and high dynamic range capture, all of that feels like what we're seeing right now with ML in a way. Like, to me, back then in the 90s, it was that, and I'm agreeing with you. It really felt like magic.
Right.
Like, how is this possible? So yeah, I'm totally with you on that.
It felt like you were bringing reality into the image, right? And it was about like, oh my God, and then just hearing it from Paul was really cool. And he was also, to me, what was impressive about him was that he was so good at talking about technology. Like, he was a great presenter, right?
He's a great presenter. Yeah.
And he can talk about technology that anyone can understand it. Like, your average New York Times reader could understand what Paul's talking about.
Yep.
And he was just so good. So I was very inspired by that. And when I talked to him, and I know anyone who's met Paul Debevec in the past knows he is unbelievably polite in the most nicest way, that he is just a true Gentleman. So when you meet him and he talks to you, he's always going to treat you with such respect that you feel like even more humbled by talking to him.
Yes. No, absolutely. I like I said, I think it's one of the, early on, because you and I both came out of architecture, if I recall.
Oh, that's right. Okay, let's take that journey back. We've gone way back. Like, let's go a little further back. You came out of architecture as well? I didn't know that.
Yeah. So I went to Arizona State, and I was in their architecture program there. And back then, I was going to be an architect. I was working on a lot of high-end homes. I was using FormZ and ArchiCAD, and AutoCAD and 3ds Max, and that really paved the way for me to get into photorealistic rendering.
Sure.
And so back then I was using V-Ray, I was using Final Render, I was using what at RenderMan if I could, and BMRT was in the mix, and it was really just trying to get any tech we could to drive, like, push that boundary of having our renders look more photorealistic than the next architecture firm, because that's what it was about. Like, how could you paint pictures of what a building was going to look like and an experience inside of a building,
right?
That could motivate people emotionally and tell a story. But gosh, everything was about, like, not everything, but there was so much of a sensitivity to faking it versus simulating it if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And because back then it was all about faking it. Like you just didn't have the compute power or the technology to simulate it. Obviously we had mental ray, which worked to a point. But everything else was just a hack. And I'm even like, we used to do radiosity solutions with, was it Lightscape?
Lightscape, yeah.
Yeah, which was great for architecture because it took forever. But it was all vertex based, lighting information, and which was great for architecture because nothing moved.
Right.
Generally speaking. So anyway, so it really kind of seeded in me a deep love for rendering. Just the all things related to that technology in that space.
Yeah.
Which, I've gone through all sorts of avenues in my career in this industry, through pipeline and various aspects of R&D and tech. But I still get excited when I see pretty pictures, that a computer's made, and I want to know. I want to get into it. How did it do that? What was the process? What was the underlying tech?
Right.
I still geek out over it. So, and I don't think a lot of people. Well, I like to think that a lot of people can't say that about whatever it is that got them into the industry that they belong into. That they still have some aspect of it that gets them excited, and jazzed. I feel blessed to have that, this many years later.
Absolutely. I think it's funny because you're like one of the, I have a lot of people on this podcast, as you know, and they're always like, not always, but a lot of people's like, Jurassic Park, Star Wars, those are the things that inspired me to get into the industry. And I love those movies and I had a great time, but honestly speaking, it was a little bit of the geek level that got to me. And when I saw stuff like, I saw stuff like The Abyss and I saw things like that were into it. Right. And then having met Spaz was another one, right? I met Spaz Williams and I got to hang out with him, and he is a crazy mofo, man. That guy is insane. But having met him, and I was like, this is the guy that started it all in a lot of ways. Right. And then also talking to Paul and everything else, I think those are the things that were really kind of incredible to me. So absolutely agree with you. Okay. So you were doing architecture. What was the jump into media and entertainment?
It was, so it was funny. My wife and I was still in architecture, and there were a couple studios in purely architectural rendering and animation studios in Phoenix. Where I was born and raised, and so I was kind of scratching that itch, right? I was still doing computer graphics, but it was in my hometown and still in architecture. And I'd already made the decision that I wasn't going to be an architect anymore. Like I was just, I was so caught up in it. I switched my degree to animation, and from architecture about 3 years in, and I was like, this is what I want to do. But I needed a job, and my skills were intersecting architecture with rendering. So anyway, and so my wife and I had bought our very first house in Phoenix, and the little studio I was working for, I'd been there maybe a year, and they hit economic troubles.
Sure.
And so they let me go. And it was really emotional. It was really hard. First time I'd ever been, no, it wasn't the first time, but it first time it really hurt because I was like, I just bought a house, and
wow,
they were so apologetic. They were, it was brutal. And then right around that same time, my wife lost her job, like within 2 weeks of me losing my job.
Okay.
And all of that matters because, here we are completely unemployed. First house payment, right around the corner. And so I was desperate. And so I was calling around, and I got a phone interview with that same auto stereo group in Beverly Hills. And they said, and I had the phone interview on a Friday. They said, can you be out here on Monday? I said, yeah. So I packed a suitcase, looked up the closest relative that I had in Los Angeles, which was in Irvine. And
wow.
I'm looking on a map from Irvine to Beverly Hills. I'm like, well, that's not that far.
Oh, no, it's really far.
It's really far. It's so far. And so for like 3 months, I worked at this gig, and I was commuting. I was probably spending about 3 to 4 hours a day on the road.
Yeah.
Which made it to where I just didn't. I was working 12-hour days because it just made sense for me to keep working and drive home at like 10 o'clock at night because otherwise I'd be spending another hour in traffic. And so, it actually worked to my advantage because they thought I kicked ass. I mean, they were like, you're amazing. How, and so it was kind of a temporary gig. And then almost, immediately, especially once they understood my situation, they're like, we're going to make you staff. And, within another year, here I was like, I think it was like director of technology, but, essentially I was an artist / TD,
And by auto stereo, you're not talking about automobile stereo, right?
No, this was, no, that would have been an amazing story if I actually drove across country to get a job for a company that did auto stereos. No. So, for the uninitiated, the I don't know if it was a phase or what. This was all before Polar Express when everyone was all enamored with 3D.
Right.
And 3D itself was like this niche, almost like VR area that was primarily being it was technology being used for advertising almost exclusively. And so there was this company out of Germany that manufactured these TVs. They're flat screen TVs, they were at the time. And if it's fascinating technology. If you ever are interested in going deeply into this, it's called barrier parallax technology, and if you're familiar with how lenticular works.
Okay, I was going to ask you if it's lenticular. Yeah. Yeah,
it's very similar. So lenticular, and a lot of my data on this is old, but I'm trying to describe it. I'll describe it how I think Paul Debevec would describe it. So it's like if you imagine these just lenticular vertical strips that go from the top of the screen to the bottom of the screen that are aligned with a pixel, and each of them is a prism. So as you look through, as your view angle changes, you're actually looking at a different pixel behind that filter, right? So that's more or less how lenticular works.
Special refraction angles.
Yes, exactly. Well, barrier parallax does that at the subpixel level.
Oh.
And so if you look really close onto pretty much any screen nowadays, you'll see a little red for every pixel. You'll see a little red strip, a blue strip, or a red strip, a green strip, and a blue strip.
Right.
And together they make a square, and that is the pixel.
Right.
So this company made these screens where each of those little prisms was at the same size as one of these little color strips.
Wow.
And the way that it was set up is for a given angle, like my right eye looking at a particular pixel, it would actually take the red component from an adjacent pixel, the green component from the current pixel, and a blue component from 1 or 2 pixels over. And so the way, like, it had a special encoding for the imagery.
Right.
And it was brilliant because it allowed for this really smooth, almost anti-alias type transition from view to view to view, because it was happening at the color component level, not at the pixel level, where you see all sorts of jaggies and so forth. So anyway, I'm actually still kind of a geek about that tech because it was really neat, what they did at the time. But they needed somebody to make content for it. Okay. So someone in the company, someone in New York or wherever they had an office was like, I'm going to fly to LA and I'm going to hire a bunch of animators and we're going to make all this CG content for these special screens. And this guy thought, well, where do they make movies? Beverly Hills. So he rented some office at in a high rise in Beverly Hills. And it was funny because we'd hire animators and artists from around the industry, and they're like, what are you guys doing in Beverly Hills? Like, there's nobody in Beverly Hills that
people live there, but there's no animation studio there.
Right. Yeah. So anyway, I do think it was kind of funny that I think the first
he was German though, right?
yeah. No, he was not, but he definitely was from New York.
Okay.
But either way, he probably had as much knowledge of Los Angeles as someone from Germany might. But anyway, so all that to say, that was really my first foray out of architecture.
Sure.
And after a few years of that, Digital Dimension reached out to me, and I got the job there as a VFX artist. and really that was my first like
VFX job.
entry into the industry. Yeah. And
what did you work on over there?
So my first film was Zathura, which was that Jumanji sequel.
Yeah.
And that was a lot of fun because most everything that I was doing was exploding, basically CG explosions off of overlaid over the miniature that they shot with. So Favreau directed that film, and at the time he was very big on this was right after Elf, and he was very big on in camera. And so, you know, this movie was all about this house that's flying through space with these two kids in it, and the house just gets obliterated over time. You know, throughout the. I don't mean to spoil it for your viewers, but if you haven't seen it at this point, I feel like we're okay.
Yeah.
But over the course of the movie, just chunks of this house are being blown off into space, and by the end of the movie, these poor kids are like sitting on a couch on like what's left of like the center of their living room, and they're just exposed into space. And of course, it defies reality in physics, but that's kind of the point. So anyway, so we were doing a lot of, hey, we need to make sure that this all looks like it was done in camera, because all the explosions, and they did a lot of doing practical pyrotechnics off of these miniatures that we were supposedly going to use, and we threw all of it away. And so it was amazing because I was a 3D Studio Max artist mainly, and so I was using that with thinking particles primarily at the time to do all this like explosive work that I'd never really done before, and so I'm learning on the job, and it was super exciting. I mean, I still remember shots that I worked on there, and just blowing stuff up in the computer was a lot of fun. But anyway, so that and Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and we had an IMAX movie, and
is that where you met Molly?
Yes. So Molly Pabian, yes. Where I met a lot of people. Molly Pabian, who, and we haven't talked about this yet, but I am currently the CTO at Crafty Apes Visual Effects, and Molly was, I think she was a coordinator or a PA, but point being, she was new to the company and relatively new to the industry, and she was awesome. Like I remember, like, she used to house sit for us because we had dogs and we'd go on vacation or something. And
wow,
and she dog sit. And funny little bit of trivia: Molly and I have the exact same birthday, many years apart,
right? But
the exact same birthday. And anyway, so we kind of lost touch over the years. I actually didn't know that she worked at Crafty Apes, so she's the head of studio for our LA
I know
office.
she was on the podcast, so people who are listening to this,
that's right.
People listening to this will know that a couple episodes ago we did Molly.
yeah. So anyway,
yeah,
it's for me again, it's like a great story of how small the industry is, and watching people start, essentially at the bottom, and myself included, and sticking it out and working hard, and not being a jerk, and or at least most of the time not being a jerk. I guess I don't know if I can say I've never been a jerk, but I think it's I don't know, it's neat to see. It's neat to see people succeed, especially good people succeed in this business.
For sure. Well, I do remember, I mean, it was about 2008, I think, or 7 or 8, is that you actually interviewed over at Sway. And
right.
What's interesting about that, this is a kind of a cool thing. Like, you interviewed, you and I hit along great. You and I got along great. We were like totally like, oh, this is going to be great. Yeah. And then for some reason, I'm not going to get into it, but you decided to go to Riot instead of Sway, which is fine. But you and I stay good friends.
Yes.
That process, which is awesome.
No, it was great. I actually remember, I remember between you and I, the main positives, because it was actually a struggle, because I had an offer from Sway, I had an offer from Riot. Not to brag, I'm just the reason why it was a struggle, because it was relatively early in my career as well. I mean, I only had Digital Dimension under my belt at that point.
Yeah,
and I also had an offer from Pixelmondo at the time.
Oh,
and to me, all three of those were like, this is amazing. But to have 3 offers at the same time, it was it was pretty amazing. But in kind of I don't know if it's like 6 ways to Kevin Bacon or how whatever the analogy is. The fact that I went to Riot paved the way for so much. Of course, that's kind of how life works. But the office that I shared, like the office that I landed in when I started at Riot, was shared with 3 other compositors. And one of those compositors was Chris Ledoux. Well,
right.
Chris Ledoux and I hit it off really well, and I met his circle of friends, many of which Chris is from Alaska, and so he was kind of the importer of all Alaskan art talent for the industry. Him and Ben.
Is there a lot of art talent up in Alaska that comes down to?
I don't know, but whatever that is a talent pool, I'm pretty sure the Ledoux's and the Grossmans are tied in.
I was going to say Ben Grossman as well.
Yes, yeah. And so Ben was part of that circle at the time,
right?
Because Cafe Group was also in Santa Monica.
Yes.
And so that's how I met a bunch of those guys. And so anyway, after things with Riot, we were all part of this Riot Features group that had this was like the second incarnation of or attempt at having a feature film group at Riot, which was primarily a finishing facility for commercials. Yep. And so after a few years of trying to get that going, it ultimately got shut down. Not mostly for internal politics reasons, not so much because of lack of performance, but regardless, I went off to, I think I ended up at Motion Theory / Murata and then ImageWorks. But Chris went and started Crafty Apes after like a little stint at Scanline. And so, fast forward, this was in 2009. So fast forward something like 14 years. Chris reaches out to me last year. I went, spent the, roughly 4 years at AWS, primarily working on visual effects and animation related like cloud technology. Mm-hmm. And he hits me up, says, hey, you want to come be our CTO at Crafty Apes? And the only reason I entertained it, the main reason I entertained it was because I knew Chris and I trusted him, and we went back to the good old days. And so all that to say, like, to me, it's a lesson. I have a niece, she's 19, she's in college, and and so I force her to receive my unsolicited wisdom, from time to time, and one of them is like, you really need to treat everybody like they will be around, and that you will want to work with them, and that your reputation with them matters, even at a young age, because you never really know. You never really know, what the people that you work with now are, what they're going to do with their lives, and how that might come back, to be a part of yours and influence yours. So,
absolutely. Yeah. And I think there's one thing that I've learned from this podcast is when I hear everyone's origin story, that there is so many humble beginnings. Right.
Yeah.
And it should look like, someone, Brian Grill, for example, right, who's of the Scanline, he's been nominated for Oscars a couple times, and, he started off changing light bulbs. Right.
Right.
So, that's a thing. Right. So always remember those things and the incredible people that are around. And, Molly is another example, right? You knew her in the early days, and now she's heading up the studio, and she's, kind of like managing people like you. Right. So, and
it's pretty crazy. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I think it's one of the things that I love. Yeah. Maybe it's like adjacency bias or some sort of bias because it's the industry that I've spent my whole life in. But, I even with my foray into big tech, I just feel like there's a soul in this industry. There's a collective, I don't know, culture in this industry that to some degree bonds us all together, that isn't based on, greed or ambition, but is a, call it a love for filmmaking or just a love for art and tech and the intersection of that and the problem solving. And, I think it's also very pragmatic.
Sure.
It's like what's the word? It's like a self-optimizing industry in that only the things that really are useful and good survive it. If a tech isn't useful, it's gone. If a person isn't cutting it, they have to adapt or they're gone. And there's like a lot of energy I feel about knowing that like the people that are around have earned it,
Right.
in a way. They really have earned it. And I think that there's like a base level of respect, almost in studios to say, look, if you're here, that you're here for a reason. And that I think that's, I don't know, that's like an exciting feeling, that I keep coming back to about this industry. I don't know.
I think it's very cool that you find it so personal, especially in the area of technology. And we're going to get to the evolution of that, and I definitely want to get to ML and what you're thinking about there. But let's talk about technology. Let's start with technology. You talked, you're mentioning your passion for technology. You mentioned in very great, interesting detail the special TVs that were being developed. How is that? How has technology sort of started your interest in what we're doing, and how have you seen it evolve over the last 20 years?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because I do believe it's evolved. And I think that's easy to say, but I I think it's definitely gone from, an era where I'm thinking in the 90s and early 2000s where there were so many problems to solve. Like we were just blessed with problems to solve, and not enough people to solve them. And I think that applied to art, to we were hiring people. If you knew how to run a computer, you were hired. And part of that was like the cost of the software and the hardware eclipsed the cost of the artist by so many degrees that it really, as a technologist, it really was exciting because you could just you could you it was kind of an open field of opportunity. And then I watched, and we all watched as, certainly the larger studios, but studios in general started shrinking their R&D budgets and their technology development budgets. And we saw technology gravitating into, these kind of, you know, holding tech companies like Foundry and Autodesk and Adobe, etc., where seeing things like Mari, for example, and Katana and Maya, etc., get kind of pulled up into these collective areas, these collective software companies, and seeing less and less investment from the individual studios, as I think the impression was that a lot of these problems were just being solved, and now instead of it being a competitive advantage that a studio has solved one problem, well, the whole industry solved the problem, so now it's no longer a competitive advantage. Why are we investing in this area? Let's just all share the support burden and pay a software vendor for the tech.
Interesting.
And so I think that obviously has been running in parallel with the games industry and game related tech in kind of next to each other, but distanced enough to where we were focused over here on, and I'm a lot of this, I'm talking about rendering technology, but we were focused on realism and like photorealism and accuracy and simulation, because we weren't operating inside of any sort of compute budget, whereas the game industry is operating in a 17 millisecond window of time that they have to shove everything down into, and so the problems were very different. And then watching as I almost feel like we saw this convergence point, or we see this impending convergence point, where technology in both spaces is converging by definition. And that has, I think that's somewhat coincided very nicely or conveniently with the general lack of like the significant reduction in investment as it relates to tech, specifically in visual effects. And so in a lot of ways, I think we're hoping for this new renaissance driven by technology that's not being funded by visual effects as an industry, but instead being funded by gaming, which has all these deep pockets.
Right.
And by, NVIDIA and others, who are looking to, seed customer bases by saying, here, we're going to, like Epic with their virtual production, efforts and all the investment that they've done in that. And NVIDIA with Omniverse to say, like, look, here's all this tech. Like, we're just going to hire brilliant people and we're just going to put them in a room together and say, here, build anything you want effectively. At least this is my view of it. I'm sure they have some direction, but the point being is, like, when you get that many smart people, you can kind of tell them, just build cool stuff, then we'll figure out what to do with it.
Do you think that's really the case, or do you think there's a motive behind this? Because the motive can't be to help visual effects, because there's not enough money in visual effects.
No, it isn't. The motive, the motive for these companies, and I'm saying this with no judgment, is to sell their own product, make money. But
Epic is not selling anything.
No, but it's still a business development.
Sure.
It's a business development movement. They can say, we're going to invest in this area of an industry that has potential, and I'll pick on Epic for a second here, but I'll specifically call out, like, what's happened with the volume walls and Mandalorian and the attention that's brought towards that. It was very possible that there was never going to that business, that line of business for Epic was always going to be a loss leader, that they were never actually going to be profitable, making money off of virtual production. It's too niche of a group, just like, HP with their, long lasting deals with, say, DreamWorks, probably weren't particularly profitable, but the optics, from a marketing perspective, from a referenceability perspective, from a business development perspective in other industries, to be able to point at that and say, like, look how sexy that is. Like that's amazing. And Unreal Engine was used for that. Or
I actually think it was all metaverse related. I think they built all of that stuff to build the metaverse, right? So
yeah, because yes, no, and I think it's all of the above.
Okay.
It's not just about, at least what I saw at my time at Amazon, the high level strategies are so, it's to your point about metaverse, are so high level that internal to these companies, and certainly how it was for me at Amazon, if you pitch a product that has the right words in it and that is generally aligned with something as vague as, let's go after the metaverse, then it gets greenlit. They'll say, yeah, go for it.
Right.
And just like the 100 other projects that they are also, that others are running. And
Sure.
And the general idea is, look, if 5 of them stick out of the 100, like, it's worth it, and we'd rather be ready to go in whatever area is going to take off.
Yeah.
Than bet big on one particular area and be wrong.
Yeah, just based on what I saw their announcements at GDC this week, with Fortnite, and they're going all in on Fortnite as the metaverse now. They're making no bones about it. And if they say, okay, great, you've already made your movie inside of virtual reality with, or virtual production, and it's already in Unreal, so let's just bring that over to the metaverse. It just makes it easy for them, I think. That's what it seems to me, which is an interesting idea in general. Okay, listen.
I agree.
I want to get to, because I know you've been thinking very hard and actually finding solutions in terms of machine learning and stuff like that. As you know, this is both very exciting and very controversial part of what people talking about in the industry. What are your thoughts on it, first of all, and how are you looking at this as a problem that you're trying to solve?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's one that I wrestle with daily. It is very much a part of my daily job.
Yeah.
To figure out to define our strategy and redefine it as we need to, because everything is changing so quickly.
Yeah.
You know, I try to bring a healthy level of skepticism, mainly because we've all seen technologies come and go. Some of them make a big splash, some of them have staying power, some of them are just a flash in the pan, and we get excited about all of them, and so I also don't believe that it's productive to sit back and just say anything new needs to get off my lawn. You know, like there's no value in that either. So it really is I think it's good that I struggle with where constantly reevaluating, does this really cool thing represent long-term potential, or is this something that is that we can actually use to make the movies and content that we make? Because that's ultimately like that as a hobbyist, it's all exciting. Like as an individual, I'm like, man, this is cool. I'm geeking out and clicking on the GitHub links, and I subscribe to all the subreddits, and I get in there and look, and I'm like, man, that's from a tech perspective, that is impressive.
Sure.
But on the other hand, as a CTO of a studio, I also need to be able to say how does this tech affect or can affect our business in a positive light, and by proxy, how can we use this to help our studio customers? And so that comes down to a lot of things. That comes down to similar to what I was saying earlier about wanting to keep up with what's going on in order to be able to strike the moment something is ready.
Sure.
Not be caught on our back feet. And so there's an R&D component. There's a keep, staying abreast of all the, and it's hourly.
Whatever happened at the beginning of the day is done by the end of the day.
Exactly. And again, I look at that as a symptom of problems that have yet to be solved.
Right.
Like that level of churn and attention doesn't happen when the people in the know, the people that are following it, the people that are deeply ingrained in it, say, we're done. We figured it out. We figured out how to do de-aging, re-aging automatically with full temporal cohesion and 4K resolution on commodity level graphics cards. We did it. Move on to the next problem. Right? Like, that's what we've seen in the history of this industry. And so when I see when I squint at the churn at what's coming across the screen, and I see that we're everything that's cool at the end of the day that's different at the beginning of the day is improvements on these same problems. It kind of tells me, okay, we're not there yet, but I am interested in one thing, and that's the velocity. Like, how does that mean we're a month away, a year away, 5 years away from getting to that place where we can actually compete, like truly say this workflow replaces the way we've always done things.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't need a full digital double pipeline. I don't need a full performance capture on set, because all of that 100% of the time can be replaced by this new technology. Mm. And until we're at that point, from a pipeline perspective, from a technology perspective, we now have to support both. Mm. And that's where it starts to get a little uncomfortable, because it's it's not until we as an industry, I think, reach the point to where a technology has been fully disruptive, or a process or a workflow has been fully disruptive, where it can truly be widespread. And that as an industry, we can kind of kick the dust off of our shoes from the old way and collectively jump into the new way. And so a lot of this might sound, really high level and kind of meta, but it is the way that I think about it, because there is so much going on in ML, outside of ML, for me to be able to say, I'm going to go and be an expert on it. I'm going to go and understand it so deeply that I'm going to be able to reliably predict that June of 2024 is the month that this particular, that we replace performance capture, or we replace the need for scans of actors, or what have you.
Sure.
So I will say that, in the near term, what I'm looking at is the small steps, the utilities, the denoisers, the frame interpolators, the upscalers, the automatic roto tools, the things that we know can provide value for relatively low risk investment.
Sure.
And so it's, as a VFX studio, especially, a somewhat scrappy one, we like to think that, at Crafty Apes at least, we like to think that we are investing in this far more than our competitors are. And it is because we believe there is something there, and we do believe that we'd rather be a part of it than watch from the sidelines.
Yeah, you don't have time to watch from the sidelines. It's
right.
It's too fast.
And I think you actually, you to your point earlier, you also can't be 1 foot in.
Right.
It really is an all or nothing decision, which is, I think, nerve-wracking a little bit. But again, I think we had a meeting earlier today, and it came up, talking about ML, and where I don't want to see it go is, you've probably seen every studio has like some flirt with some notion of like an auto comp tool. It's like, oh, just drop in an auto comp tool, and it's gonna automatically pull in all your elements and make your comp for you, and match your blacks and your grain, and you don't even need a compositor anymore. And they never work, and when they do, when they do work, it's only in very limited situations.
Right.
And they're not art directable, they're not tunable, and I think if we see ML go that direction, it will be a shame.
Yeah.
I very much want to see the world that I want to see, where artists are using ML and studios are using ML, is as art directable tools and applications that still allow them to be part of that process, and still give us the level of art directability and tunability that we're accustomed to as an industry.
Sure. I mean, there is a lot of tedious work that is done in visual effects that, if that can alleviate tedium, that would be good.
Yes, exactly. And that's again where I come back to utilities, and efficiency gains as it relates to like compute spend, and like, can I render it at 2K and then up-res to 4K and have it be, effectively as good as if I'd render 4K.
Right.
Like that's a 75% savings,
Sure.
and that's something that no one's going to complain about.
Yeah.
It's not going to affect the final product. It's not going to affect the the artist iteration loop and process. And so I think those are the things, the uncontentious bits that are also relatively low hanging fruit that to me pave the way for the more complex and technologies and use cases for ML that I think still have a long way to go.
You mentioned earlier, excuse me. You mentioned earlier how studios would have technology as a competitive advantage. Do you think we're back to that now?
I think the possibility exists. I look at examples of studios that get reputations for being able to do certain things.
Yeah.
Like Rhythm and Hues and Talking Animals back in the day, and there's a certain aspect of that I don't know that any one studio is going to be the ML studio. No more than I think a studio would be the Maya studio or any other technology, as a brand. But I think to the extent that studios can develop a reputation for certain services and functionality, and they have proprietary technology that helps drive that. Scanline's another example with their water systems. I think we might see more of that. But it is tough. It is tough to say because I think most of that has been driven by capabilities, like visually discernible capabilities. You see a movie, we'd watch a movie back in the early 2000s, and if it had talking animals and they were really, it was really well executed, you knew it was a Rhythm show.
Sure.
You're like, oh, Rhythm. I'm sure Rhythm did that.
If you saw a bunch of volumetric explosions or smoke and stuff back in early 2000, you knew it was DD and Voxel Bitch, right?
Exactly. or any movie where the antagonist was an ocean wave or something.
That was Scanline.
Like where there was, there was water involved. You're like, oh, there's Scanline at it again. Yeah. But that was, or even Army, like battle sequences with Weta and Massive, like before that went commercial, like you knew that they were involved there, but that was because it was a visually discernible thing. It was new. You're like, oh, that's a gag that I've never seen before, and now that I'm seeing it more often, I've associated it with the brand. But I feel like over the years we've reached this saturation point where it's like we've seen it all.
Sure.
So what is there that's left to see that can be associated with a brand, with a studio, as a result of proprietary technology, ML or otherwise, that's so recognizable that we connected to them strictly from what is actually being put on screen. As opposed to, I'm an EP at NBC Universal or Fox, and I see a certain type of shot, and I know this studio is going to give it to me cheaper, or this studio is going to execute it the best with the fewest amount of notes and the fewest amount of iterations, because they have proprietary technology, and I feel like it's going to be more of that. It's going to be studios up leveling their ability to execute efficiently, more rapidly, in the sense that with fewer notes and in ways that just improve on the old.
Sure.
And they're the ones that are going to rise to the top.
Now, I actually, real quick before we go, because I was just curious about your thoughts on this. We've seen a lot of the same thing for a long time recently in the film industry, right? And not to say that it's bad or good, it's just all looks the same, right? Because everyone has, as you mentioned, all problems have generally been solved under that lens, right? And so, like, when you suddenly see something like Everything Everywhere All at Once, right, which is solved by people who are not those guys, right? And it looks completely different. You're like, what the hell is this? I don't know what happened. And then you realize it's done at a completely different level. That's very interesting because suddenly it looks like something you hadn't seen before. Do you think that we are going to start to see things we've never seen before a lot more because of what people are going to discover with ML tools?
Yes. And it hadn't occurred to me in that light, but yes. And it reminds me, one of the first moments of like hope that I had in that regard was the Spider-Verse films.
Oh yeah.
Like
Perfect.
like looking at that and going, like they broke the mold.
Yeah.
They really said, let's not do just yet another, full CG, 3D looking film and with some shader tricks. Let's create a new aesthetic, a new visual vocabulary.
Yeah.
And I saw that, well, I hoped, because that was really the first time that had happened in a long time. I had hoped that it represented a shift. And I think it has. I mean we've seen more films come out with, kind of that NPR, look. And so I guess where I go back to is, does the creative flexibility that animation provides make it more likely for us to see what you're describing happen there, more so than in the visual effects realm?
Sure.
Where we're still, it at least feels like we're much more confined to the rules of reality and photorealism and feasibility in that sense.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, you and I talked about the early, late 90s and early 2000s. I mean, that was when everything was new and we're all trying to solve things. And I think we got kind of comfortable in that seat for a little while, right? And then you brought up Spider-Verse, but I mean, honestly speaking, that's actually a lot of it is Alberto Miyago, right? And it was Alberto Miyago's. He was not ultimately part of the end of the Spider-Verse, but he's the one who started it and who did some of those things. And he did a lot of that stuff in Love, Death, and Robots. And to me, when I was looking, I was like, everyone else is doing something and Alberto's doing something else. And somehow we're all confused as to what the hell just happened when, and we
like it.
Yeah, we love it.
We like it.
We love it.
Yeah. And I think that's great. Like your reference to Love, Death, and Robots is another great example. Like I love that, as it reminds me of the old animation show of shows type thing, or just
Liquid television
theater.
and all that stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's like have an opportunity for us to, as an industry, to experiment with what's possible and break out of the molds, break out of just this purely, pipeline based commercial kind of like, let's just crank through shots, and as long as they all look the same as the last movie, then everyone will be happy. I think it's fantastic, and I don't know how to encourage more of that, but I could absolutely see ML influence that.
Yeah,
I mean, hopefully we get out of this like current state of ML where it's just amorphous,
scary thing.
Random.
Take your job away.
and give me. Well, I'm talking. Yes, there's that, but also visually, like all of the, there was a music video that someone posted on 3D Pro, I think it might have been.
Okay.
And it was beautiful, but it was just embracing the aesthetic, the ML aesthetic, as opposed to saying, hey, how do we make ML? How do we use it as a tool to achieve what we couldn't achieve before?
Right.
As opposed to saying, let's just make the things that the tool spits out.
It reminds me, I remember when I was in architecture school at Rice, and we had We had Wavefront at the time. We had Alias Wavefront on an SGI, and one of my professors really wanted help. He was going to pay me to bring his project into Wavefront for some reason, right? And so I'm doing, and Wavefront's default color was this kind of a weird blue color. I don't know if you remember that. That was kind of like a sky blue color. That was their default color for an object, right? And he's sort of like totally obsessed about the default color that the program gave. And it's like, this is the color. So started going on this whole tangent. It's like, dude, that's the default color of the program. You should go beyond that. Like, make your own color. It's just kind of ridiculous. So
I don't know. It kind of reminds me of early computer art.
Yeah.
Where it was totally limited.
Mind's eye stuff.
Yeah, totally. It was just completely limited by what was possible at the time, and it was like, oh, computers can make spheres and pyramids and
checkerboards,
sinusoidal, ground planes. So we're just going to make a bunch of art that does that, and everyone's like, this is beautiful, and we're like, yeah, but it all looks the same because that's all anyone can do at the moment. Right. and I think we're kind of in that space with ML, at least on the animated front.
Sure.
Like the still image side of it is absolutely bonkers.
Right.
I mean, like what is able to come out of a model in terms of still image is just how far that's come is
in just
amazing.
Like 6 months.
Oh yeah. It's really incredible. Yeah. But coming from this industry, I think in a temporal space.
Sure.
When it comes to graphics.
Yep.
Like everything I look at, I'm like, how's that going to work with time sampled data? How's that going to work with motion blur? How's that going to hold up, with transparency and reflection and refraction over
deep
time?
Color.
yeah, all of it. Yeah. And I don't think I'm being a naysayer or a skeptic or a cynic in that. I'm just looking at it from the perspective of
practical, yeah.
We make movies. Yep. Literally, it's in the name. They move.
Yep.
Like we need to figure that out. And so I get less excited than most about a lot of the ML stuff because I'm waiting to see that. And I think a lot of people in our industry are. Sure. I'm not the only one that brings it up. But to me, that will represent the kind of aha moment. From a production, like a practical production perspective.
Yeah, that makes sense. Well, listen, it's going a little. I don't want to take up too much more of your time. I actually have to. The reason I had to ask you to go a little early is I'm actually going to have to do a martini giant thing after this. Nice. So that's not happening that. But I really appreciate this. Listen, I'm very excited about what you guys are doing. It's really cool that I'm able to talk to like a CTO at a really great visual effects company. And we're not just geeking out about technology. We're talking about the implication of the art and the creativity. So it's really refreshing to hear that perspective from your point of view. Is there anything that we can look forward to in terms of what's going on at Crafty and what's going on? Obviously, you said you guys are trying to focus a little bit more on ML, but is there anything we can look forward to seeing what you guys are up to?
Not that I think we're in a position to announce right now. We didn't get into more of the cloud stuff, but we are investing heavily in that as well. Mm-hmm. With my background with AWS, I think it was pretty much a foregone conclusion that we would at least investigate that as a possibility. Just cloud studio in the cloud architectures and global architectures, etc. So I think you're likely to hear some announcements around that soon. Mm-hmm. On the ML front, it's only tough to say because it's tough to predict any of it. And so I think I will be very. My expectations is that as soon as something is ready and is technology that we can utilize to do what we do, to make content, to make visual effects, we will use it. And again, we already use ML throughout our production pipeline.
Sure.
Anyway. But what I think the last 6 months represents for us, that is a pivot, is our level of investment and leaning into that, to not just be the recipients of whatever it is that the industry decides to grace us with in terms of technology, but to also help drive it and innovate. And I think that it remains to be seen what that yields, but I am excited about it. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, for someone who's a cynic to be excited about it, I feel like there's a little bit of credibility. Everyone's excited, but sure. I'm begrudgingly excited. And I think that, I think that should lend some confidence.
I think it's interesting that people that I have talked to, the ones that are the most non-fearful of it, are the ones that have been doing it for a couple of years.
Right. I mean, they already know, they understand
yep.
it, what it is. They understand what it isn't.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree. I think the more that I learn about it, the more that I understand, again, what it is and what it isn't, the more I've been able to think of it as an engineer.
Sure.
And that, as opposed to, looking at it from the outside going like, I'm in the same boat as everyone else. I don't understand how it works or why it does what it does. And that, that makes it difficult to predict. And so it is a mindset shift, thinking about problems in terms of data sets and training and model refinement and, things of that nature. It is a mental shift, but I think it's still very much an engineering one.
Sure.
And so I think it's just a matter of time before, just like any other technology that we've used over the years to make movies and content, we'll see a collective shift or spread of understanding, and you'll get supervisors, etc., who will look at a problem or look at a show or look at a shot and say, oh, you know what? Like, I think we can solve this with ML.
Right.
Let's just like we would look at it, 20 years ago, we'd be like, oh, you know what? We can solve this with ray tracing.
Yeah.
It's
funny because there were people that were very upset when people started introducing ray tracing to the pipeline.
Yes.
Because they were like, this is going to take away my job as a shader writer. It's going to take it out.
Totally.
And they were hating shade. It's like, no, we'll just simulate everything. It's like, but we take away all the creativity of lighting by ray tracing.
Totally.
It. And people were very upset.
I was at ImageWorks in the few years after the switch from RenderMan to Arnold.
Yeah. I was there right at that start. I was still using RenderMan then, and I vowed to myself I will never render a shadow map ever again.
Right. I mean, and then there was I was actually at DreamWorks during the shift from Moonlight to Moonray.
Mm-hmm.
And again, similar things, and from like Katana as a compositor to Nuke as a compositor. Mm-hmm. I mean, just any time that you introduce paradigm shifts and people who place value in their ability to make tools work, and then you take away their tools, you take away their tech, and you give them new stuff. It's scary. It really is scary, and I think there's something to be learned there as well in terms of managing technology rollouts. And I think we can look back at that with ML and say, this isn't, yes, this is new tech, but this is not a new situation. We have been in these situations before where disruptive technology has threatened or made people feel as though that their livelihoods are at stake. And I think there are right ways to go about that, and there are wrong ways or less ideal ways. And I think it's important for us as an industry to be cognizant of that, like recognize that we still need to move forward, but we need to do it in a way that, is respectful and, takes care of us as an industry, and the people that are in it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Sean, listen, thank you so much for being on this. It was a great conversation with you. I really appreciate it. And, good luck with everything going on over at Crafty. I'm sure you guys are going to do amazing work, as you always have. And it's just really cool to hear your background and how that's worked for you.
Thanks, Chris. No, this is great. Like like I said when you messaged me, it's a long time coming. I've been looking forward to being on your show. So thanks for inviting me, and I'm sure we'll talk soon.